Hello humans, today I want to talk about this guy right here. This is a crkt m21 with their secondary safety locking mechanism. This is a knife that I picked up almost a year ago now, I think. At the time, I believe it cost me about $116, and I mean, for what it is, it's pretty good. So obviously I've had this for a while. I'm not doing the full unboxing. I'm not going to do edge testing or anything like that because I have resharpened the edge more than once on it. I'm just going to talk about sort of my carry experience and how it has felt to me. Some quick specs out of the way first though before I begin. This is G10. The blade steel is 1.4116, which is a German cutlery steel. Everything I've been able to find about it says it's got a really high corrosion resistance, okay toughness, and not amazing edge retention, which pretty much sums up how I feel about this thing. And then on top of that, they have this corrosion resistant coating, which is a choice. Given how corrosion resistant this steel is already, this is obviously just a tactical option for it. Personally, I could have done without it, but I don't mind having it on there that much. It's not too, it's a little bit textured, but it's really not too bad. And I mean, it does, you can see it's keeping streaks and stuff like that in the coating, but I've experienced significantly worse, so I'm not going to be too upset about that. What I am going to be a little bit less positive on is the steel itself. It's not a bad option, but like at $116, this thing is facing some pretty steep competition out there, and I don't think that this was the best choice. Honestly, I would have taken D2 over it. Right, 9CR, something a little bit more recognizable and a little bit better, in my opinion. But other than that, this thing is heavily built to be robust. You've got a very large, very hand-feeling grip. It's not really a choil so much as it is just a finger space, but if you're the type of person who hold it like this, you can actually get a lot of backwards pressure. It makes a really good poking implement holding it like this. And then just using sort of that flipper tab as your anchoring point for your finger, which is nice, but there is absolutely nothing stopping you from slipping forward onto the blade if you don't have that. Otherwise, I mean, the flipper tab is obviously just going to act like a very good finger protector if you're poking into stuff, which is quite nice because the geometry of this, I mean, it's not perfect, but you can see it does taper out quite a bit towards the tip, and it does poke fairly well. It does chop pretty okay. You can see how much belly you've got there. All around, I actually really do like this blade shape. It's a bit of a pain to sharpen sort of this recurve section, but that's really not so bad, and it does last pretty well. On the outside of the blade, you have these two big stops that they kind of serve as thumb studs. If you want to like slow roll it, you can, but really and truly they're there just to make this thing absolutely lock solid, and it really and truly is. The secondary lock here, what it does is it just prevents you from locking it out completely, but you can still move it aside a little bit, and like very small amount of rattle when you do that. But if you don't hold it to the side, there's no rattle here, and it's not going to disengage on you as long as that secondary lock is in place, which is quite nice. Some quick size comparisons. Here it is next to the Civivi Chevalier and the Wii Banter. As you can see, it is quite a bit bigger than either, and like even in the handle, it's got, because of the way the handle is shaped, you are kind of more prescriptive in your hand size that works with this. The Chevalier, even if your hand's a bit bigger, it's not being forced into that smaller space. But for my size of hand, right, extra large glove at work, that whole shebang, it fits well. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. And then here we have our Buck 110. And it is actually noticeably longer than the Buck 110, both in blade, I line up sort of the end of the handle there, and in handle it is bigger than the Buck 110. And then here it is next to our Zippo. In terms of thickness, I got the feeling this is going to be on the yeah, that's pretty comparable to the Buck 110. It is ever so slightly slimmer, but really not by much. And blade stock thickness is actually the exact same as the Buck 110, so it is absolutely a little bit more of a robust piece. Something that is kind of nice in terms of just adjusting the pivot is that you have a flathead screwdriver to do all of your pivot adjustment, which is really nice. And you have, I'm going to double check that, but I think they're T8 body screws. I'll check that after I get the blade stock thickness out of the way. Turn on. There we go. Yeah, 137 thousandths. Like, this is a thicker blade stock, and it does feel pretty good. I mean, you only have like a saber height-ish. Yeah, just double checking, but it's a saber height-ish hollow grind. It is fairly slicey. It's nothing amazing, but in terms of cutting tasks, it does pretty well. And just because of how robust this feels, I'm comfortable pushing it a lot harder into certain areas. Like I said, it makes a solid chopper. You can choke back a bit and get a good amount of chopping in there, and you can get right up behind that blade to do some finer woodworking. So even with suboptimal geometry, it does do a pretty good job of everything that I need it to do. Something else that I personally feel they did a really good job on is the way the pocket clip is set up. So obviously 4-position pocket clip, but the pocket clip itself isn't super deep carry. And I like this quite a bit because it lets me, even with like gloves on, I can pull it out of my pocket fairly easily. And this isn't a knife that's difficult to manipulate, even with like my heavy forging gloves on. So you're gonna be a T8. Yeah. So they are, of course, T8s for the body screws, and then it's gonna be T6 for the pivot screws. Yeah, T6, just not pivot, I mean, it's upside down. It's a T6 for the pocket clip screws, which totally makes sense. The way the mechanism, I'm not going to bother disassembling it because that's more time than it's worth, but I have in the past disassembled it. The way that the secondary lock works is there's a little coil spring on the inside. This right here is attached to, you can just barely see it in there, that little piece right there that's moving. Coil spring pushes it behind the lock bar. You move it out of the way, and then it stays stuck behind the lock bar. You can see right there, sorry, it moves just with the spring. It is a little bit more difficult to manipulate with one hand as a result, but what I found works really well is just using my middle finger to pull it back, my thumb and index to close the blade. The action's okay. It could definitely use a stronger detent, in my opinion, just because of how substantial the blade is. Like, it's fairly long, but it's also quite heavy. So you do need to give it like a good solid flick in order to get it out. If you kind of wishy-washy it, it's not going to work. But as a result of it having a lighter detent, you can do that if that is something you'd like to do. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it's a lot of movement for what it is, but it does technically work. You have some jimping on the spine. It would have been nice to see it go out all the way up to sort of this swedged section, but it goes up to about here. What's interesting to me is that they spent the time to jimp sort of this section, and like, you can, theoretically, it's very difficult, use it to open the blade a little bit, but honestly, this isn't a front flipper, this isn't a top flipper, this does not work for that. So I would have rather seen that extra jimping, instead of going somewhere where my finger's never going to interact with it, to go up a little bit farther to somewhere where my thumb might, if I'm doing like a heavy cut or something like that. Overall, I think this fits really well into something that CRKT is really good at, and that is bringing people from the Mall Ninja, gas station knife, tactical section over a little bit more towards being a knife person, enjoying more reasonable stuff, right? Because in the CRKT package, you have stuff like the Biwa, which is very much very practical knife, and then on the other side of that, you have stuff like the Provoke. I want a Provoke EDC. I don't have a Provoke EDC yet. I do quite want one, but stuff like the CRKT Provoke, which is very much comfortable in sort of the Mall Ninja tactical communities, and that's fine, right? Something like this bridges the gap. It's a large knife. It's a very, very tactically inspired knife, but it does make a good work knife. It does make an okay EDC knife. And because it's a liner lock and not a frame lock, you can hold it anywhere along the handle with no issues. You know, you're not going to accidentally press on the lock bar if you're doing like something dumb and twisting in a cut. You're not going to accidentally lock it out completely, which is quite nice. The blade shape, like I said, really useful. Having that quite a bit of belly out here makes slicing quite efficient. The tip is very accessible. A little bit of a recurve section is annoying if you're not used to sharpening that. But again, really and truly, it's not bad at all, which is pretty much the best you can hope for. Overall, I think for the money, there are better options, even in the bigger knives category. But at the same time, I don't think that this is something bad, and if you like the aesthetic of it, it will serve you well. It is a little bit on the bigger side. It is a little bit more intimidating if that's something you need to worry about, but in general, I would say, yeah, if this is something that you think is cool looking, it's a well put together, decent knife that has no major downside to it. I would like to see a slightly nicer steel, but given CRKT's pricing, because their pricing can be really weird sometimes, I feel like if they upgraded the steel on this, they would charge like an extra $60, which would be sad. That would, as it is right now, it's kind of on the upper end of what I would consider to be okay at 110, 115 bucks. But yeah, I think that's where I'm going to sit with this. It's recommendable if you like it, and if you're not looking to min-max your pricing. If you're looking to min-max your pricing, something from Civivi or Kaiser would probably be a better bet. In that $100 range. There's other companies that do it really well in the $100 range too that I just have less experience with. I mean, Buck does phenomenal stuff in a fairly comparable size package. Hold up, let me grab one. It's going to be a little bit smaller, but this is the Buck 259. And as you can see, it gives you a lot of that presence in pocket that the CRKT does. And it's on bearings instead of washers, because the CRKT is on washers. Which again, not inherently a bad thing or a good thing. It definitely adds to the robust feel of it, but sort of there you go. Yeah, that's kind of all I had to say on the matter. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.